two people to lead me here, but neither have ever actually been to this room, so we wandered a little bit.
All right. Well, as everyone here knows, we're here today to see Brandon Sanderson, who finished up the last 3 books in the Wheel of Time series. And I think that everyone's ready to just get going. So with that very brief introduction, today we have Brandon Sanderson, and to his right is Meshira of the popular blog What If, Nadine Armstrong, and Patrick Young. These are our Comicon panelists, and they will be grilling Mr. Sanderson on the Wheel of Time.
Okay, are you going to ask me questions, or am I just going to talk? Because I can talk. You guys probably already heard me.
We thought we'd let you talk a little bit, and then we would go yield.
So I'm Brandon Sanderson. Yeah. How many here picked up the Wheel of Time in 1990 when the first book was released? You've got your copy. Hold that up. Look at that. I picked mine up, I was 14 or 15. I'm not sure exactly which month I picked it up in. And I grabbed it at my little local comic book store, actually. They carry fantasy novels and comics and Magic the Gathering, so I really never needed to go anywhere else. And then, 17 years later, I got a phone call from Robert Jordan's widow, Harriet McDougall. For those who don't know, she's one of the great editors in the field. You may recognize some of the books that she's edited, such as Ender's Game, which she did. She also discovered Robert Jordan and then married him, I think to make sure that her editorial direction got taken. She had been there on the Wheel of Time from the beginning, and before he passed away, he asked her to find somebody to finish the series. He didn't want to do it himself. She said she thought that doing that would be like facing his immortality. Because even when he asked her, it was kind of like I'm going to make it, but if I don't, just so you know. You know what I mean? Like something like that. And so she started looking. She considered it a dying request. She started asking people. She started going around and gathering names of people that would be suggested. And I wasn't on any of those lists. I was a brand new writer at that time. I had like 2 books out at the time, and basically nobody had ever heard of me. But when Robert Jordan passed away, I wrote a eulogy for him on my website, mentioning a little bit of what he meant to me. It was very short, it's only like 3 paragraphs, but it was from the heart. I talked about just how much of an influence he'd been on my writing. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who did that. In fact, I know a lot of authors did. But a friend of Harriet's saw it. She was scouring the internet for nice things that had been said about Robert Jordan to kind of help her out. And on the day of the funeral, brought these to Harriet and put mine on top and said, "You really need to read this one." And so Harriet did. And then she called Tom Doherty, who is the president of our books, and said, "Who's this kid? I want to read his books." And that's kind of where it came from. She read Mistborn. She called me and she asked me to finish the Wheel of Time. I did not apply for it or anything like that. I had no idea this was coming. I just answered my phone one day and there was a voicemail from Robert Jordan's widow. And so at that point, I did say yes. I was terrified, but I said yes. And at that point, I flew to Charleston to pick up the notes. Now, first off, I probably should have done this earlier. I want to warn you guys, I'm gonna not, I won't go out of my way to make spoilers, but I'm not going to hold myself back or people who make questions. I'm not going to hold them back from asking questions. This is the Wheel of Time panel. We're going to talk about the Wheel of Time, and so you will get spoilers. I'm sorry. So at this point, I got handed the notes, right? A lot of people are really curious what the notes entail. It's like this mystical thing, right? Notes, what are the notes? And so what they were is, it's actually really funny. I didn't get to see any of this before I flew to Charleston. In fact, I didn't get to see any of this before I had to agree to the contract. They just had to say, they said, you just got to sign it, say yes, and then we'll show you everything. So I had no idea how much was done, right? And I could have gotten there and found like a book that needed one last chapter, that probably wouldn't be the case, because Harriet wouldn't be going looking for another author in that case. She'd finish one chapter. But I had no idea what I was going to see. All I knew was that he had written the last scene of the book. He had said for years he had in mind, so when I was on the phone with Harriet, I asked, did he actually get that written? She said, yes, he did. We do have that. So I knew that much. So I flew to Charleston. It's kind of a hard flight from Salt Lake to Charleston because there's no direct flights, and it's like all the way across the country. So I'm like there, I'm exhausted, it's like 9 p.m., I walk in the door, and Harriet had left a soup on the stove. She went over and started warming up and said, do you want some dinner? Some black bean soup. I don't know, these little details you remember. And I said, no ma'am, I'd like the ending, please. And she laughed, she said, okay, she went over and she got it, she handed me a stack of papers, right on top, with a post-it note, and on a post-it note was Who Killed Desmond? Just written right there. It's a piece of paper, and then a fan theory that Robert Jordan had written, this is right, and stuck a post-it note to it. And that's all I knew about Asmodean, and then I started looking through these notes, and this is really like where the fire hose turns on. They had printed off a lot of these for me, and in this stack, I'd say there were maybe 200 pages there that they handed me. And then there was a CD on top, a DVD or whatever, and on that were all of his world building notes. And I once, if you guys have followed my Twitter and stuff, I once took this and I tried to add all these things together. Because on this CD, which was a replication of what was on his computer, there were just like folders and folders and folders, and they're like subfolders, and there's like, you go to dig down like 5 folders deep, and there's like one file there. It's like its own weird organizing structure, right? And they'll be named things like, for book 11, remember this, and it'll be like character notes in this city, and just random things. And I once decided I'd just take Microsoft Word and I would add these all together into one file, just to see how much there was. Because Harriet always said there was more in notes than there were actually words in the series. So I did that. And at about, what was it, around 4 million words, my computer crashed. And Microsoft Word said, I'm not doing this anymore. So 4 million words, the entire series is, I think, 3 million something, even with my books. So yeah. There's a lot of notes there, and they're very chaotic. This is the equivalent of like Da Vinci's sketchpad, right? Over 40 years of his life, where he would just sketch something and move on or whatnot. That's how I imagine it. Robert Jordan would have like a file with like a paragraph in it, and then another one would be like 20,000 words of lists of character names. Like one time, I was kind of confused in the early process of like, who are all these people with Harriet? When I read through, I read the books multiple times. I'm a Wheel of Time fan, but I'm not the detail or any type of fan. Like, I knew all the main characters, but I didn't know the names of the side characters. I'm like, yeah, there's some Aes Sedai that hang out with me and they're annoying, right? And there's some Aes comes over here, and they always, they fight, and Perrin gets caught in the middle and whatnot. I'm like, okay, who is here with Perrin, right? And I said, can you give me a list? And they're like, well, we found this in the notes. These are Robert Jordan's two assistants. They send me back, point me at a file, and it says with Perrin. I'm like, oh, good. But no, this was not the people, the side characters. This was names of all the Two Rivers folk that had not yet appeared by name in the book, and their professions and their ages. Right? Like just a list of like 100 names. That sort of stuff is in this CD. And this is crazy, and it's got a lot of repetition in it too. Like all of the glossaries are in there. So if you search for someone's name, you end up with 11 glossary files that are basically the same, along with all the stuff that he set it up in. And so there's just so much in all of this stuff. It was really hard to sort through, and that's why the assistants had printed off these 200 pages, which I thought were the most relevant. And the idea was that I would take these 200 pages, and that would be what I would work from directly. And other questions I would, of course, welcome to search through the CD, but I could really just ask the assistants, and they would play Google and spend a couple days diving in and coming out with an answer if they could find it. And so the 200 pages were really what became the last 3 books. The rest is all there, and I made extensive use of it, but I made extensive use of it through my personal librarians who work on it. And so the 200 pages are what I usually refer to as the notes. And in here, there were some completed scenes that Robert Jordan had written before he passed away. This included much of what is now the epilogue of the last book. That was the last scene that he talked about. There are some parts of the epilogue that are mine, and you can bring up the book and I can point them out to you. But the last scene and the bulk of the epilogue was his. He had written a lot on prologue for the book, which when the book got split into 3, we took a chunk from each of his prologues and put it in. So that includes like the scene with the borderlander and his son on the tower. It includes the scene with the old farmer on this doorstep watching the clouds roll in. And it includes the scene where there's Rand with some Shan-Chan. It's from the Shan-Chan viewpoint. I think it's the Suldam things, and they're all freaking out because they're looking at Rand. Right, it's right together in Storm's prologue. And then there's the scene with Slayer, Esau in the last book. The scenes like this in the prologue, we've done quite a bit of work on a prologue. And then there were little scenes here and there through the whole the sequence that was at that point one book. The scene where Gwen gets an unexpected visitor at the White Tower. I believe it's called A Cup of Tea. That chapter, just that scene, not the whole chapter, but just the scene where this person shows up. The scene at the end of Towers of Midnight, where 2 characters get engaged. That little scene, just just a fragment, 5 paragraphs. And then, a big sequence in the Tower of Genji was written. And things like this, just fragments. And they weren't in any particular order. The assistants had just put them in there in a pile. I'm we don't know the order of these. We've got to guess. This is what we think. I eventually ignored that because he hadn't given me the instruction where these things were to go in order and sequence with one another. Underneath that were his own note files for specifically Book 12, which were take notes to himself, make sure this happens, or Perrin is going to do this. In the last battle, here's what Perrin's going to do. Remember to put this in. These are notes to himself, which means they weren't terribly clear all the time, because he would be remember the brick, and you're like, okay, Jim. His real name was Jim Riggin. Remember the brick. We'll do that. That isn't actually one that was in there. Stuff like that. Just little phrases that I just stare at. And I call the assistants and be like, what? And they're like, we don't know. Do what you can. Dead mule. There's got to be a dead mule in the book. They knew about that one. But anyway, it's just all of these things. And then after that were the Q&As that they had done with him, basically on his deathbed. When it became clear that he was really sick, that the time was growing short, he started talking about the book. And he didn't normally do this. He was very private about the process. He would prepare it. She says she would never seen something until it had been through 12 drafts. He liked to present a story that was polished and done, even to his assistants and things. And so he just started talking. And they grabbed a voice recorder and just recorded him talking through things. The scene with the farmer was actually dictated. And he started, this is a famous talk where, if you've read about from Wilson, Robert Jordan's cousin was there, and they're very good friends. And Wilson said, Robert Jordan looked at him and said, there's a village of neglect, and nobody knows about it. Not even Harriet. And started talking, and these sorts of things, and just started going, and Wilson would ask questions of Harriet, Maria, and Alan. They'd say, what's going to happen to this character? And he'd say, well, this is where they end up. And a lot of those were focused on actually the very last part of the last battle and after, where everyone was going to be, what their final state was. And so I would split those groups up pretty evenly in those 200 pages. maybe 50 pages of written material, and then, 75 of each of the other or something like that. I haven't done a count on it, but that was what was handed to me in a big stack. And from there, I was to craft the final book, trying to do my best to keep his vision. But there, you can imagine, there were enormous holes in that. Robert Jordan, he didn't get a lot of it written. He got a lot of it planned, but he didn't get a lot of it written. And in some cases, he told us a lot, like Wayne and Gathering Storm. He basically had everything there outlined. Everything that happens to her in that book, like he didn't write it all, but he had the majority of it in very specific detail. I was able to pull phrases from his notes where it basically becomes a quote from Wayne that Robert Jordan had said in his notes and things like this. And that whole sequence with her being rescued and the Shanshan attack of power and everything was point by point what Robert Jordan said to do. For Rand and Gathering Storm, we basically had almost nothing. And so it's like, the first things we know of Rand are things that are happening later in the sequence. And so in that case, we knew something needed to be there from stuff he'd said. In that case, I had to go to the books, which I started on in January, right after I picked this up. This is 2008 then. And I reread the series. You can actually read my reactions as I reread the series. I did a series of blog posts on it. And built an outline using these notes and my own instincts. And this is why they had to find someone like me. If it had all been there, they really could have put it together themselves, maybe hired a ghostwriter to finish off a few things and have the book completed, but it wasn't a mistake. They needed someone who could actually construct the plot, not someone who could just follow an outline. She said she chose me because she liked my writing, but she knew I was also a fan. Because I had read the series multiple times, and this was just a project they felt they needed to give to someone like that. And so, across the next 6-7 months, I constructed an outline. I worked from an outline. Robert Jordan didn't work from an outline. He was what we call a discovery writer, and I'm more of an outline writer. And I built this thing. I flew to Charleston again, and I brought my outline, and we sat and we brainstormed the holes. And then like, we need something here, here's what I think should go here, and they're like, no, that won't work, do this. And I try to pitch things to them and talk them into things. One of my big talking points to them at this thing was, we can't do what's comfortable. We can't write this book in a way that we don't take any chances, that we don't do anything, we can't have it just play out exactly like everyone's going to expect. We can't be so careful of wondering what Robert Jordan would and wouldn't do that we don't take chances, because he would have. If you read these, the thing with Varing shows that he wanted to be audacious in this last book. And this was one of my big fears, that we would just play it safe point by point. And at the end of the day, we'd have a bland book where we didn't take any chances because we were too afraid of creating new canon, or of changing character arcs or completing character arcs as I envision it, things like this. And so I pushed them toward more. I was a force for pushing. Let's take chances, and they became a force for, we're going to try and, in many cases, stabilize this and make sure we're not pushing too far. And that's where Unfettered came from. My story in Unfettered, the dotted downstairs, I think Mysterious Galaxy has it. It's the deleted scene from A Memory of Light, a deleted sequence, which is from the viewpoint of the Mandarin. And this sequence, is one of these things that I'm like, let's push, let's show Shara. I know Robert Jordan said we weren't going to be there for a lot, but we need, these books are about world building and about new things, and let's try showing this. This is me pushing. And then we got it done, we got in the book, and we realized we pushed too far. Because having an entire new culture that we're running into in the last book was too distracting from what the last book should be about, so we cut it. That's Harry comes and says, this is too striking. I think that balance between us, and she was completely right, that sequence didn't belong in the book because of those reasons, allowed us to be audacious, but also not go too far. And that was the balance that we were really striking for. So I built this outline. In Towers of Midnight, Matt is more Robert Jordan. Specifically, he did a lot of the plotting in the Tower and Genji sequence and then wrote some of it. And Perrin is more me. In fact, we didn't know a whole lot about what Perrin was to do other than Robert Jordan was toying with the confrontation with the White Cloaks. He didn't exactly say what that confrontation would entail, just that we had to deal with the White Cloaks and Perrin in that book. And so Perrin was basically, you know, me. Perrin's my favorite character. I'm like, I'm gonna do a Perrin book, darn it. You know, if I've got 3 books, I'm doing one with Perrin. And so a lot of Towers of Midnight with Perrin was me. And then in the last book, a lot of the beginning and ending were Robert Jordan. Specifically the confrontation at the Field of Marilor, he had plotted out there in a lot of detail and had a lot of things for us to do. And then the epilogue, he had a lot of things in there. And specifically, Rand's confrontation with the Dark One. He told us the soul of what we're to capture. He didn't tell us specifically what to do, but he had told us what Rand needed to discover and the conclusions he needed to come to, and kind of I came up with a pitch statement to them, how to make that happen in a visual kind of dynamic way. And so there's kind of a breakdown of the books, of what's going on. And I try to avoid talking too much specifically, like, is this scene you, is this scene Robert Jordan? Partially because I don't remember anymore. You know, I've been working on this thing for 6 years now, I guess is how long it's been, and I don't know which things these days come from a random thing I found in the notes. I'm like, oh, we need to make sure we include this, and then we build a scene around it, or where he talks about a scene, and which things were me reading his books and saying, man, this really needs to have get fulfilled in the last book somewhere. And the assistants say we don't know what he was going to do, so I'm like, all right, I'm going to use my best instinct to do it. Which things were somewhere in between all of that. And so I spent all 5 years working and compiling this and writing this book, and now it's finally done. And the other big question I get from people is, how does it feel? And it feels like I put down an enormous weight. I'm so glad that I was able to carry it for a while, but I'm also very glad to be able to put it down. It was a very hard thing. Writing these books was the hardest books by far I've ever written. It took twice as long to write a given scene in The Wheel of Time as it does in one of my own books, just because I had to make sure I was getting all the viewpoints right, and all the characters right, and all the side characters right, and all of these things. And it was this really big challenge. It forced me to grow a ton as a writer. I grew by leaps and bounds. You can go find, you know, if you go read, the Mistborn series and then you read Way of Kings, you can see my author development, writing style-wise, and things, just by being forced to crunch these big weights and things like that. And I'm enormously pleased and honored to have been a part of this. Robert Jordan was one of my heroes, and being able to help out at the end, this is the sort of thing that just, doesn't happen, right? This doesn't really happen to people. I dreamed someday of becoming a writer and actually making this as a writer for a living, and that alone seemed like this mythological thing that I could maybe never even obtain. And then to have it go this far to being able to work on the book series that inspired me and turned me into a writer, it's been amazing. So there's my little spiel, I guess. That was less a spiel and more me rambling a bunch. But let's have you guys, if you have a few questions for me, go ahead and ask them. And I would like us to have some chance to let the audience ask too. So yeah, go ahead.
One of the questions I have is, you had noted that Arthur Hoffman goes and talks to Tulon, but it does have an offspring. So is there anything you can tell us about that? And also a little bit about what happens in the Tel'aran'rhiod? Do the heroes know their past mistakes, so Arthur Hoffman realizes he made a mistake with the Ice Die?
Okay, there's a couple questions here. Okay, the first one on what happens between Arthur Hawkwing and Tulon. Keep in mind that yes, Arthur Hawkwing was under some dark influences during his career. But he also, even without that, would not have been very fond of Aes Sedai. He's not the type who would have been very fond. And I think he and Tuon would get along swimmingly. Despite him probably having some tough advice for her and things like that. I think that he would be very proud of the Seanchan as a nation. Maybe not completely proud of everything they've done, but the fact that somebody kept his legacy and was that strong with it, I think he would think that they are completely awesome for what they've done. And maybe they would have had some words about other things. Robert Jordan was planning to do a sequel trilogy about Matt and Tuon as main characters specifically. We only know 2 sentences about what he was going to write in that sequel trilogy. One of them was, and I'm not going to get these exactly, Harriet may have, she said she was going to release them, so she may have posted them somewhere she's planning to. So these are just, I'm not getting the exact lines, but one of them is Matt is like in a gutter somewhere, and he's wearing a knit cap, and he's like gambled everything away. Or something like that. And then the other one is Perrin is in the belly of a ship sailing somewhere, we don't know where, thinking about how he's got to go kill a friend. And this is what we had. We're not going to write those. They couldn't be Robert Jordan's. They would have to be too much someone else's. And it's best to just let it be done, we feel. But anyway, so I think they would get along, but there would be words. And I specifically did write that because I knew that that would have been something that would have been for the Outriders. That whole conflict, Tuon versus what is right with the Demane and things like this, was something Robert Jordan was specifically planning to deal with in that trilogy. And I just felt it was best not to try to wrap it up here. And the second question was, how much do the heroes know about the world at large while they're in there? From things you can infer through the books, they do know some. They don't know everything, but they do know some things. Just go read how much Birgitte seemed to know. And a lot of what she was getting, she was doing by watching people live and tell. So, there you go.
So for a large part, obviously, you had direction on what events were going to be happening. How much guidance did you have on the internal evolution of the characters?
This was one that where I had more free reign. Specifically, Robert Jordan would talk about things. He talked about where Rand needed to go, and specifically, I weren't just spoilers. He says, one of the big things Rand needed to realize, character moment-wise, was he needed to come to understand that the Dark One was necessary. That without the Dark One, that there would be no choice. Which is actually kind of interesting because I'm sure lots of people thought that I put that one in. Because that's actually a big element of Christian theology and Mormon theology and things like that. But it was specifically the thing that Robert Jordan said that Rand needed to come to understand. He also needed to learn how to laugh again. And this was indicated in there that we knew through the course of this, not the ending. The ending was about his other religion. Before then, he would learn how to laugh again. He would need to enter the last battle as somebody who could laugh again. And so I knew that. And so that's actually some fairly good character direction for him. But for Perrin, I didn't have basically anything at all. My own instinct said he needs to, he's put aside the axe, but what does that mean? What does it mean? Perrin was the one that I felt, both Rand and Perrin, at the end of Night of Dreams, were in a place where they needed to grow a whole lot before the last battle happened. Egwene was basically there. She needed to show it, but she was basically there. Matt was basically there because he's Matt. And, expecting Matt to have deep character growth is expecting an opossum to get up and dance a jig. He does have it, but, he's not going to show it to you. It's layered deeply in there. And so, but Rand and Perrin both had these huge distances to go character-wise. And in a lot of cases, I was using my instincts. I mean, it seems to me like I talk about these things, it sounds like I just made stuff up, but as a writer, you read like 11 books of The Wheel of Time, and it's like listening to a pianist play a familiar tune and then stop 2 notes from the end. Every music theory person out there can go, oh, these are the next 2 notes. And reading The Wheel of Time, I knew the next notes. It's just obvious to me what the next notes were for things like Karen's growth and Rand's growth. And having the notes, it seems very obvious to me, like this is what needs to happen, this is where he was going, and so let's build that out. And that's another reason why, you know, it was good to bring on a writer. Harry always said, people asked her when we were on tour, frequently like, so did you ever consider writing it yourself? She's like, no, I'm an editor. I need to have something, even something, you know, mediocre. But I can take something good and make it excellent. I can take something mediocre and make it good. You know, this is what I do. And I'm hoping that mine wasn't mediocre or good. I'm hoping that's but you know what I mean? Like, that's what she needed. She needed something to work with. And it's a different skill set. But anyway, so there you go. I had a lot of free reign in that area. It's one of the places where I said we need to kind of push this forward, and they never even questioned on that on King Jordan. They were completely on board on that one. There's some things when I do things like, you know, let's go to Shara, or let's show these glimpses of the future, or things like that. Like, let's be careful, and things like that. I eventually won them over on most cases.
Well, you already answered one of the questions that I had, which was, did you feel closer to writing some characters than others? I think it's very clear that you really had a great time writing Perrin, and felt like Perrin was like your guy.
Perrin was my guy. I've always loved Perrin. He's always been my favorite of the 3, and he was very natural for me to write. So yes, the other thing that I did that you may have heard of is when I went back to Charleston. So the second time when I pitched the outline, I said, I really feel like we need a sequence of viewpoints in the Black Tower, and I don't feel from the way that the notes are and from my own instincts that we can have a main character there other than Pavara, and I would really like to show an Asha'man viewpoint. Is there an Asha'man who that we know nothing about from Robert Jordan's notes that I can take over, basically, and play with how I want? And they said, yes, here's this guy, Androl. We don't know anything about him. Go for it. And I took Androl, and I also did this because I felt, you know, each Wheel of Time book had added characters to kind of and elevated them from just a name to a personality. And each book had done that with different characters. And I felt it would be out of place if the last book didn't have somebody that became more to the forefront. And I really wanted an Asha'man so I could play with gateways. It's kind of, you know, my brand new magic system thing. I love magic systems. And with the Wheel of Time, I didn't want to go in and change the magic system. I liked it as it was, even though it didn't follow, you know, it wasn't the style of magic system I do. It was a wonderful magic system, and I wanted to use it like he used it, but I did want to take like a few aspects of it and really kind of play with it the way that I play with magic. And I want to do what I want to do is Perrin and the Wolf Ring push that really far along what he could do, and then the other one was gateways. I'm like, if we had these things, they would be so awesome, and you could do so many cool things with them. And so I pitched the idea of an Asha'man who had the talent for making gateways, capital T talent. And so they gave me Androl to just basically do whatever I wanted with. And people have mentioned, and I kind of feel bad about this. They're like, it feels like Androl strolled out of one of your books in the Wheel of Time. And it kind of does. And I apologize for that. I don't want to be distracting like that, but that's kind of what Androl is someone who strolled out of one of my books into the Wheel of Time. And so, yeah.
And then I do have one other question. Was there anything in the notes that surprised or shocked you?
Yeah, when Tom and Maureen got engaged, I'm like, what? And then the assistants are like, no, it's in there. It's in this chapter, and I go look, and I look back, and when I did my reread, I'm like, oh, I guess it is in there, but boy, I missed that one. Like, I knew they were maybe, like, you know, I thought they were maybe the first date stage, you know, like, I knew there was something there, but the fact that they were ready to be engaged off screen, they had spent enough time together that they were totally on board. That surprised me. That was the biggest shocker for me. The Baron scene was a surprise, but kind of more of a cool surprise. Like, I knew something was going on there, and I read all the theories, and like, Yeah, you're the bomb, girl. So the Baron one, it was surprising, but it was kind of the opposite surprising, whereas Tom Warren was like, what? Okay. No, I'm not who these people, I know who they are. Yeah. I'm quite aware of who Tom Warren is.
So you weren't surprised by who killed last one?
No, because that had been talked over so much online. I read all the theories, and then who got us voting? I'm like, oh, that group's right. Well, the rest of the group's gonna hate me. When I put it in, they're gonna, yeah. But we put it in the those who don't know, we put it in the glossary at Towers of Midnight because we didn't know anything. It's just a post-it note to me. I'm like, I'm gonna make it a post-it note to them. I'm just gonna stick it in the exact same way, and then they can be just as frustrated as I am, not knowing anything more about it than who it was.
When exactly did Lanfear start using compulsion on Perrin? Did it happen all the way back in the Dragon Warren when she visited him in his dream and talked to him about Lori?
No, because Lanfear actually considers compulsion to be a crude tool that she didn't want to have to use. And back then she was more confident in her ability to do it without compulsion. By this point she was far more desperate. And she was willing to kind of get her hands more dirty, if that makes sense. So no, that was not something that extended all the way back there. Well, I did ask specifically on that as we were developing this thing. So yeah, Lanfear considers compulsion like, that's the other First Citizens thing, she can do it without. But in this book, she had some very intricate plans, many of which I still haven't seen fans picking out. So. And not all is not as it seems when it comes to Lanfear in this book. Okay, so are we gonna go to the audience? Sue's gonna call on people. Is that your job?
That's fine.
Okay, go for it.
That's why I've been
Yes.
shutting up this whole
Oh, good. Oh wait, are we gonna do a drawing? Where'd Patty go? Patty, let's draw names and get. We have memory keeper shirts. Dude, these things are fun. They're for the book tour. We did like a rock star, like the tour rock star kind of thing. So, all right, I'm gonna draw out. There's one in each size. Okay. So I need to draw you out, and then.
Did we need to take it?
Oh, okay. Well, we'll do one question while we fill out the last tickets.
Okay, the first hand I saw was the gentleman in the hat right there.
Can you tell us how many named characters made this thing?
How many named characters made the print? You mean in the whole series? Last time I think it was 2,200 something. It might be more than that, but that's last time I had. Yeah.
We're ready to do this drawing?
Okay, well, no, we didn't get there. Let's do another question.
Okay, one more question. Gentleman in the gray shirt there.
So they did the prequel, the New Spring.
Yes, New Spring.
Have you been authorized to write in the world and do any of the other stories, like say, telling the actual dragon story the first time through?
Have I been authorized to write in the world and do any of the other stories, such as New Spring? Harry and I sat down and talked about this on the second visit to Charleston. We went to dinner, and when she said, all right, prequels and the Outriders, what do you think? And my line from the beginning was, no. I really don't think we should do any more fiction in the Wheel of Time world. I feel that, I have read interviews with Robert Jordan. This is where it was coming from. Long before he passed away, people would ask, what happened to the finish the series? He's like, I'll have my hard drive reformatted and, melt it down. So you better hope that I finished, because otherwise you'll never get an ending. And he changed his mind about that, but I think he did so uncomfortably. He had said many times he did not want other people writing in his world. I hope there's not a punch to the face waiting for me on the other side. But I know there would be if I didn't stop now. I think out of respect for him and his wishes, it needs to be done. And so I said from the beginning and that was where Harriet was coming from. It wasn't that I had to convince her. She just wanted to hear my argument because she was hearing the publisher's argument on the other side. Because the publisher wanted as much as he could get. Because that's the publisher's job to get cool books and release them for you all. So what might happen, and if I have any influence over it, it will happen, is we might be able to see some of the other stories, because he left some brief notes about the other prequels, where he was gonna write one about Tam going to war. That's the one I really wanted to see. And another about Warring Land, a second one about Warring Land. If I have my way, we will see these done as video games. Or other media. Something that is kind of expanded universe-ish, so we don't have to worry about his legacy in the same way. But, you know, I can imagine an awesome sort of like, you know, Knights of the Old Republic style RPG where you are playing as Tam and, you know, leading the two rivers, and I mean, you could have a really awesome open world RPG there. And the Shard thing, you could do a great one like that too. And so that's what I really push for, is I'm like, let's do this. Before the inevitable question comes about film properties, Universal holds the rights to the Wheel of Time. They have been developing it as a feature film, Eye of the World. A lot of us on the inside have encouraged a television show. I have told them several times, look guys, this would make a much better TV show. And so I'm hoping that they will go that direction. I don't know at all what they're going to end up doing, but I know they, you know, when I talk to them, they've listened, and that's what Harry has kind of said too. She feels like a television show would be a better way to go. So we don't know, but Universal holds the rights. All right, let's do a few of these. Okay, so 178, which I assume is what everyone's has. 761. 761. No, no 761. 761! Yay! Come on, computer! What size of shirt would you like, sir? I'm sure this we do. There you are. All right. And let's do another one. All righty. This is, what's the name? 683. 683. Is that you? No 683. No. Okay. 683. You missed out. All right. What's the name? 716. 716. Hey, come on. Yay. What size would you like, except extra large, which is already been... Oh, we do have one more extra large. A medium or large? Let's give you the medium. There you go! Yay! Okay, here we go. There we go. 178, 623. 623. Hey, come on up. Yay! Would you like large or extra large? Extra large for you. This is a gift to you for coming all this way. Okay. He came by and got it, looks like yesterday. All right, what do we got left? We've got a small.
I see 2 smalls and a large.
2 smalls and a large. All right, let's draw one more. Here we go. So tense, so tense. 178, 710. Hey, come on up. Yay! Oh, you're wearing swag. How do you like that? Swag available at Brandon Sanderson's booth. Do you want the large? Okay. So, who wants smalls? Raise your hand. Oh, right there. And right there. Okay. Is that okay, guy? I just threw him okay. So, let's do some more questions.
I haven't taken anyone from this side of the Lydian thing.
I just wondered, did Robert Jordan dictate if he wanted to live and die at the end, or was that just all?
Good question. Did he dictate who he wanted to live and die? This is one of the things that he left a lot on. Specifically, you know, where people ended up and who survived and who didn't. There was one major character that I made a call on. He didn't say specifically, one major character that Harry made a call on. Otherwise, if he didn't say anything, we had them live. So there's one major character I killed and one major character Meredith killed. I haven't announced mine. She announced hers. It was Swan, was her character. She had always identified as Swan, and she wanted, Swan to. Anyway, she felt it was appropriate for what we needed to do. And the reason we did this is sitting down. We all decided that that the last battle couldn't happen without some fairly high-profile casualties. And we didn't know, we were fairly sure that Robert Jordan was going to make the call, but he hadn't made the call. He's very attached to his characters, and he would probably have not made the call until he was writing those last scenes as a discovery writer. And so we felt that, you can't go into the last battle and call it the last battle unless some serious stuff is going down. So we both made our calls, and that's how it happened. But almost everybody, Robert Jordan said.
Okay, before we get to the next question, if people are taking pictures, if you can just not have the flash go off, that would be appreciated. Okay, next question. Pac-Man.
Can you tell us a little more about how much they know about the Age of Legends?
How much they know, how much the characters in the world know about the Age of Legends? Well, Rand knows a whole bunch. So it spans from Rand and the Forsaken, who know a lot, to everyone else basically only having fragments of books. The breaking was pretty devastating. The war followed by the breaking, followed by all the stuff that happened. So, I mean, they have books that talk about things, but you'll find, like, when they're trying to figure out if one of the Forsaken is hiding in the White Tower and Towers of Midnight, if you go read that, you can find, they find these books and they've got quotes, but they're like quotes from people who heard from someone else who read from a book that's no longer around. So they don't know very much at all. How much is in the notes? The notes focus most exclusively on the Third Age. There is more in the notes than you know, but not a whole lot. Like most everything we know, and most everything that's in the notes we know. There are tidbits here and there that are fun, but it's not like the notes have this huge, exhaustive, extensive. It's not like we have a book's worth of just writing on the Age of Legends. We have tidbits here and there.
All right, another question. Gentleman with the British Open t-shirt right there.
They talked about the early part of Wanderer's earlier history. They saw in the whatever town it was, Whitting, I think it was, and it made it seem like it was modern day New York or Tokyo or something like that, where they had planes.
Oh, in the Age of Legends.
And well, I don't know if that was what they were referring to as Age of Legends, but when the Wanderers
Yeah, because they saw the war happening. They saw when the Dark One escaped. So yeah, that is Age of Legends, though a lot of the flashbacks were right post-Age of Legends. There were ones during the Age of Legends. And the Age of Legends is, here's the thing you, as a fan, you kind of have to to figure out your own theory on, all right? Because it's strongly implied that the world we live in right now, with skyscrapers and airplanes and things, would be the First Age. He doesn't say it exactly, but there's an implication that that's Age number one, and that the discovery of the One Power shifted us into the Age of Legends. And so the Age of Legends became a hybrid between what we call modern technology and the One Power. And so there are these weird magical things like the Nim that are derived from use of the One Power in tandem with the One Power, but there are also like remnants of our world, such as airplanes that have been naturalized, so to speak, and things like that. And now that's a strong theory. The other theory is equally strong, though, that the Wheel of Time world is not our world specifically, that our world is a mirror world or a shadow world of the Wheel of Time, one of the possibilities that you see. And that, there is the core world, and what we're living in is a shadow of that, meaning that things are not quite exactly one-to-one the same. And that world is our world. And I think that theory is also equally strong. Robert Jordan did not tell people. It might be in the notes, but I'm not going to tell you because he specifically, this is one thing that he wanted people to be theorizing on. Before I was involved in this, and I just say that it's not that I changed, maybe I changed my mind, maybe I didn't. I was always a fan of it is our world, but the First Age was our time theory. I mean, the fact that there's a Mercedes symbol and there's, they talk about America and Russia and things like that as legends during their time. If you don't know, they do. All of this stuff indicates to me that that's what Robert Jordan wanted to imply, but we don't know for sure.
Gentleman in the striped shirt right here.
Yeah, so can we hear some of Lanfear's other plans?
No, you've got to figure them out on your own. Obviously, Rappo. You can read the books again and find out. It's in there.
So there was one of my friends, we were reading the last one, and our biggest freak out moment were the generals, when you find out that the generals are all wonky now. Who came up with that one? Because there was a lot of texting happening, like, do you know what he did? Yeah,
That was the generals, that was actually more me. Robert Jordan indicated that several of the generals were to die, but he didn't indicate how. But one of the things we need to do is we need to construct a narrative where this entire war was happening, but also where the war chapters didn't all just feel like every other war chapter. And we also, I wanted something where, I wanted Forsaken plots to come in a big way to be meaningful and important to this. And that the Forsaken weren't just out there slogging it out, that there were plots and intricacies hiding in the background. And so I pitched even in that first visit, the great captains, being a target, they would be. There was also, in Robert Jordan's notes, an indication that, and at this point, they give everything over to Matt. I'm like, why would they give everything over to Matt? Well, it seems obvious to me that Matt can be immune to this. He's immune to the one power, and as long as he's got his medallion, and that seems like a perfect reason that they, even though they all trust Matt, but not really, but kind of, would give everything over to him, the gambler. And so anyway, that was a plot sequence I pitched to them in April of 2008 or June of 2008.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions. The gentleman in the plaid over here.
You spoke about Andrew a little bit more, him being more your character. Were you expecting it's almost like a 50-50 split? Everyone either loved him or everyone thought he was a horrible.
Yeah, I totally expected that 50-50 split. Because I was going so far with the magic system with him. I knew there would be some people that would find him. They would not be comfortable with that, and I knew others would be like, yeah, this is awesome, this is what I want Wheel of Time to be. And that's one of the things you run into by having a fan be in charge, is that, in most cases I'm trying to do things that are not going to be that divisive. I'm trying to, keep the soul of the series, and everything I'm trying to keep the soul of the series. But at the end of the day, the fans don't get along. We do not get along. This is why we have websites where we argue. And knowing that about fandom, there were choices I was going to make that half of fandom would hate no matter what I did. And I knew that, I was aware of that. And the thing you run into by having a fan in charge is my theories, when we have nothing else to go on, end up as the ones that end up in the books. And I'm sorry, but that's just how it had to be. There was no, my interpretation of Land as a character is an interpretation and through his viewpoint, because we haven't seen it a lot of him, that some fans are not going to like. And some fans will be like, yeah, that's exactly how I saw Land. He's on the inside, he doesn't see himself as stone cold, he's a person on the inside, he just has such, he just is so good at not telegraphing his emotions. From the outside, you see him as this cold rock of a man, and you go inside, and he's a normal person. That's my interpretation of Land, that's how I've always seen him. When I write him that way, some people are like, no, this isn't Land doesn't have that much emotion. And that's a valid interpretation, they're just wrong. And we argued about this, and there's no way to do it both ways in some of these things. With gateways, there's no way to have it both ways. Either we stay with just doing them, kind of more the normal way, or we go completely bonkers like I did. If you can't, I suppose you could have gone a little bit bonkers, but I'm never fine going a little bit bonkers. So yeah, I was aware that doing some of these things were things that some fans wouldn't like. That's also partially why, by the end of the book, Androl's been a fun character that's done some important things, but he's not central to the plot, because he's still a side character. I had a lot of fun with him, but the story isn't about Androl. The story is about Perrin, Matt, Egwene, to a lesser extent, Nynaeve, and Avi and Elaine. And so, yeah, you know, the big six are what the book's about, and I can have fun with side characters. Tomanes is another one. You saw my interpretation of Tomanes. I've always read him as tongue-in-cheek. Some readers do not read him as tongue-in-cheek, they read him as oblivious. And that's a perfectly valid interpretation that is wrong. And if I'm going to write from his viewpoint, I'm going to express the way I view the character. So, there you go. And I'm sorry if that, I hope it didn't ruin the book for anybody, but I do understand that some people are going to run across the Tomanes scenes and just shake their head and be like, no, this isn't Tomanes. And that's okay.
All right, we've got time for one more. The lady with the very complicated equation on her shirt.
I just want to know, was it your idea for a 200-page chapter or his idea?
200-page chapter.
I want to know who to curse when I...
You can curse me. That was another one of my audacious things that I pitched because it's not that audacious, it's a little bit audacious. My goal with the chapter was, when you get to this chapter, the characters cannot put down their weapons. They can't really, they've got to keep fighting. They're fighting for their lives. It's the end of all things. I didn't want you to be able to easily put down the book at that point. I'm going to read one more chapter. And then that chapter takes you like 5 hours or whatever. It shouldn't take 5 hours. But it's like a 3-hour chapter to read. And I wanted you to be like, man, I can't put this down. It's 2 a.m. I got to finish this chapter though. And then I wanted to end that chapter in a way that you're like, all right, and turn to the next page. And then the next one's very short for that reason. Like that, you can do things with chapter length and with the form of a book where you bounce between viewpoint characters that I find very fascinating. You can have an effect on the reader by the way you shape just where the chapters are, not even the content, the length of them, and how they bounce between one another. And this is something I would really like to try to play with because I think it's an underutilized part of a novel that can do fun things. And so the 200-page chapter was me during my thing. Yes, curse me, raise your fist in the air. All right, so we're done, I believe, but I should have announced my booth number because I'm going to, where's Isaac? Isaac.